Okay, I think we'll go ahead and get started now. So welcome everyone. Thanks for attending today, and thanks for joining this Adam Matthew webinar. Today we're going to be exploring the 2020 collections, so all of the frontlist collections that are publishing this year, some of which are already published and some of which are forthcoming this year. So my name's Alex Butler. I'm the Outreach and Engagement Manager here at Adam Matthew. And I'm going to be moderating today's session. So we're going to go through a bit of housekeeping and then we'll get into each of the collections. Lastly, if I could just ask you to make sure that your video and your microphone is muted throughout the webinar, just so that our presenters can present to everyone else and that the recording is nice and clean. And we'll address everyone's questions right at the end once we finish the presentations. Okay. So that's it from me. I will pass over to my colleague Claire Mentz, who's going to talk to us about medical services and warfare. So Claire, take it away.
Hi, thanks Alex. So my name's Claire Mentz and I was the development lead on the Medical Services and Warfare 2 project. Medical Services and Warfare 2 presents military, scientific, professional and personal perspectives to explore medicine during conflict from the post-war period to 1949. So this is an 11 archive resource which documents a range of developments which changed medicine and patient care from the post-war period to the mid-20th century. And in many ways, it will show how requirements of modern warfare and the treatment of wounded soldiers brought about solutions which were later made available for civilian use. So we include materials on the antibiotics age, beginning with the discovery of penicillin and the subsequent system of mass production. Advances in the organisation of medical services during the Second World War is covered by a variety of papers on areas like plastic surgery, material on the awareness and treatment of typhus, malaria, burns, blood storage and shipment, nursing and humanitarian aid. The project also includes personal diaries, memoirs and correspondence, as well as reports, articles and papers that catalogue a range of technical and scientific innovations. And one of the key benefits this resource offers is the chance for comparative study, particularly for those researching innovations across the US and the UK. So, for example, content from the National Library of Medicine documenting treatments of psychiatric conditions can be viewed alongside the research of Sir Aubrey Lewis from the King's College London collections. And documents on public health in wartime in the United States can be compared to documents planning emergency medical services during World War II at the National Archives in the UK. A variety of tools for students include a continuation of the Wounded in Action feature, showing treatments of gunshot injuries and conflict, contextual essays on medical advances in the Spanish Civil War, treatment of burns at the East Grinstead Hospital, an essay on the eminent psychiatrist Aubrey Lewis, and then a Petri dish visualization based on frequent terms in the Alexander Fleming papers, and the application of handwritten text recognition on his manuscripts. And that really makes these important scientific notebooks more searchable than ever before. So I'm just going to go on to talk about a couple of the key innovators and features that we have in the medical services resource. Firstly, the Fleming collection from the British Library, which includes 36 scientific notebooks of Sir Alexander Fleming, including those outlining the discovery of lysozyme, an early antibacterial, as well as the groundbreaking discovery of penicillin in 1928. And you can see pages seen from his scientific notebooks on this breakthrough on the slide here. So Fleming was a veteran of the First World War, and he was witness to many deaths of soldiers from infected wounds. He turned his attention to experimenting with antibacterial agents in the interwar period, and his discovery of penicillin was really a defining moment in the context of the Second World War, where quantities of penicillin were synthesized and distributed extensively to treat wounded soldiers on D-Day. And these scientific notebooks are full of data, drawings, penciled notes on his experiments, and they're described in detail by the British Library's extensive catalogue information. And then using the Petri dish visualization, which I've also featured on the slide, Students are offered a really interesting way into these important papers, tracing how Fleming's research changed over time. So the next special feature I'd like to talk about is the Guinea Pig Club and Sir Archibald McIndoe. And these pages outline the range of primary sources we've included. So Sir Archibald McIndoe was a preeminent plastic surgeon of the 20th century. And the story of the airmen and the pilots he treated for severe burns is one of the great medical success stories of the Second World War. So McIndoe was in charge of one of the specialist wards at the Queen Victoria Hospital in East Grinstead. And he was also one of the pivotal figures in the government-created committee researching burns. He used saline treatments to wash wounds, and that made it possible for him to pioneer the use of the tube pedicle treatment. He learned this from Harold Gillies, and the tube pedicle was created by cutting a flap of skin from the chest or the neck, which could be stitched into a tube. And then by creating this tube, the surgeon maintained the blood supply to the tissue, keeping it alive and able to be used for skin grafting. These operations took months of painful repeat surgery, and in order to keep his patients' spirits up, McIndoe encouraged a boisterous and jolly atmosphere on his ward. So strong bonds between the patients were encouraged, which then led to the formation of a club, which bore the name resembling the manner of their ongoing and novel treatment. And they called themselves the Guinea Pig Club. They organised regular drinking jaunts, annual dinners, and many are still in touch with one another today. And one such member is Bob Marchant, who is the secretary of the Guinea Pig Club and also technical assistant to McIndoe. And we have a video interview with Bob Marchant here, who recounts life in the operating theatre and on McIndoe's ward, alongside lots of other documents featured from various archives on the Guinea Pig Club and McIndoe. So thanks very much for listening to this brief introduction to some of the highlights of the forthcoming project, which we'll be publishing in May. I'm going to hand over to my colleague, Matthew Brand now.
Okay, thanks, Claire. So yes, I am the production lead for East India Company, Correspondence, Early Voyages, Formation and Conflict. And this collection comprises documents from Series E of the India Office records held at the British Library in London, dating from circa 1600 up to 1858. So this spans the origins of the East India Company as a chartered trading company, which sought to facilitate trade between England and what were then known as the Spice Islands in Southeast Asia, up to its zenith as sort of an empire in its own right. And ultimately the uprising in 1857-58, which led to the company essentially almost being destroyed and then essentially nationalised by the British government. So this collection comprises correspondence between the senior administrators of the company, and this is the really high level stuff. So the court of directors, the secret committee, the board of control, which was appointed by the British government to oversee it in 1784 after the government had been forced to bail the company out to the tune of, I think, what would now be around £120 million on one end, and on the other end, the company's governing apparatus in Asia, the heads of its factories, ships captains, other important figures really all over the world outside of Britain. And these roughly 690,000 pages cover really all kinds of themes. So the correspondence contained within it covers all facets of the East India Company's various activities in the Indian subcontinent, Arabia, the Middle East, China, Japan, and Southeast Asia. This includes diplomatic relations with regional powers such as Persia, Burma, the various Indian polities, colonial rivals, namely the French and the Dutch, and it covers, as I've said, all facets of the company's activities: trade in bullion, trade in commodities such as tea, opium, and spices, covers its administration, covers its various activities within India, including, say, taxation, railways, building of telegraphs, river transport, its territorial ambitions and war making, and its eventual downfall. So I've got that to reiterate that above. So we've got the key themes, really to put them in a nutshell: trade, empire, conflict, diplomacy, and also life at sea. There's quite a quantity of material on the maritime aspect of this trade. And there are some interesting features we've got. So obviously East India Company already has a large number of contextual features. There's a chronology, there's a government structure chart. You can go into these as an alternative route into documents from, say, a period corresponding with the events covered in the chronology. New for this collection are what are known as detailed contents listings. Now, these provide exhaustive downloadable lists of contents for selected volumes of draft, i.e. outgoing correspondence from London out to Asia. And these are also searchable at site level. So say if there's an individual or a subject or a place mentioned in one of these select volumes, you find it in a search at, site level, this will trigger a handwritten text recognition search of that document, and you'll be able to go straight to that phrase. All of the handwritten items within this collection do have handwritten text recognition as well, which really opens it up. There's also a series of additional essays, including a guide to Series E of the East India Company records that will be available. More and more roads really into the documents. There's also some incredibly rich metadata available for some volumes, down to individual letters, individual accounts of, say, silver or coral or whichever commodity. So really, I believe that researchers and postgraduates already familiar with manuscript documents or the East India Company portal will find great value in this resource very easily. But altogether, all of these features, I think, make the material both accessible, often searchable at site level, and therefore really open to everybody. As you can see from the document we've got up here, this is a 17th item. These are not difficult items to read. They're very often written in a very neat official hand and are really quite easy to get into, compared to some materials of this period that may be found elsewhere. And so just on to a few collection highlights, because there are some really quite fantastic things in here. Again, these are some documents which I think are quite representative of the collection. The one at the bottom left is actually one of the earliest items. It's from 1600. It's to do with relations with the Sultan of Aceh, and again, remarkably readable for a document of that age. It is, I should also add, in English, which is another route into the documents, but there is some fantastic stuff in here. We have letters of William Adams, the first known Briton to visit Japan. I believe his arrival in Japan, we've recently reached the 400th anniversary of that. There's a lot of correspondence between various rulers of either England or elsewhere. So we have correspondence between Charles II of England and rulers including Shah Abbas the Great of Persia, documents relating to Indian rulers such as Aurangzeb the Great and Tipu Sultan. We also have a quite intriguing series of documents concerning pirates, including William Kidd. One of the more interesting documents of this variety is an account of pirates disguised as Englishmen attacking shipping in the Calicut roads in the late 17th century. And then we also have, of course, as already mentioned, the top-level correspondence from Governors General of India, including Warren Hastings, Richard Wellesley, Henry Harding, Lord Ellenborough, Lord Dalhousie, to the course directors and the secret committee. So very much high-level stuff, and it really does cover all manner of subjects. The document on the right of this slide is a 19th century military dispatch. You can see the sort of level of detail they're getting into. There's talk about troops' quarters, financial expenditures, all manner of stuff. And Along with a lot of this correspondence are also detailed financial accounts, quarterly reports. The level of detail contained in these documents and the indexes to them, I really can't emphasize how much can be drawn out of it from really all aspects of anything that could possibly be related to the existence of this company and its position in global history. So really that is East India Company correspondence. I will now hand over to my colleague Harriet, who will be able to talk about food and drink.
Thank you, Matt. Hello, I'm Harriet, and I'm the production lead for the second module of the Food and Drinking History resource. So module 2 follows on from 1 in charting the evolution of food within everyday life, the rise and establishment of the professional chef, and changing culinary tastes. It's aimed at scholars from a wide range of disciplines, including history, sociology, nutrition, literature, geography, and politics. The second module is adding about 2,500 documents to the resource, covering mostly the 19th and 20th centuries, but with some earlier material as well from the 18th century and a few early modern gems as well. The earliest document in the resource actually dates back to 830 AD, and I'll talk a little bit more about that one in a moment. So these are some of our key themes in Module 2. In global and ethnic cuisines, we have a large selection of Asian, African American and other international cookbooks from the Michigan State University. We've also got European cookbooks from the New York Academy of Medicine. In advertising and packaging, we have some great material from the Fry's collection. Fry's was a chocolate manufacturer based in Bristol in the UK in the 19th and early 20th century. And we've got management records, business accounts, recipes, financial records, lots of really interesting behind the scenes information about the company. The health and nutrition theme includes official investigations and studies into hunger, malnutrition and community health. We have field foundation reports from the Dolph Briscoe Centre for American History, and also government reports from the UK National Archives, and 17 really amazing films on healthy eating and food hygiene from the First and Second World Wars and also the interwar period. They're from the British Film Institute. In education and cooking schools, we have cookbooks, periodicals and ephemera from the prestigious Janis Bluestein Longoni Culinary Archive at the University of Michigan. And in alcohol production and consumption, we have material on viticulture and the Californian wine industry from Cal Poly Pomona. And that includes the Thomas Pinney wine labels with wine tasting comments, also photos and ephemera relating to vineyards. There's a run of Balza's Guide to Food and Wine, and also a series of oral histories featuring interviews with vineyard owners and workers. So I'm briefly going to share a couple of the highlights of the second module. The first is De Re Culinaria, which is a recipe book of Greek and Roman dishes, which originally dates back to the 4th century BC, and it was compiled by Marcus Gavius Apicius, who was a Roman gourmet from the 1st century AD. And we have 6 editions of this very famous work, the earliest of which is the document I mentioned earlier that dates from 830 AD. And we also have 5 later editions, which date between 1498 and 1909. We're also planning a special feature to provide some learning support for these documents, including an introductory video from one of our expert editorial board members and an English translation of the earliest 830 AD manuscript, and a commentary on the following 5 editions and how they changed over time. And another highlight is the Julia Child papers from the Schlesinger Library at Harvard. Julia was the doyenne of American cuisine in the 20th century and one of the first celebrity TV chefs. And her papers include menus, filming plans, tour itineraries, and a great deal of correspondence and notebooks, and all of which gives scholars an insight into her television shows and appearances and how they were put together, and the introduction of foreign cuisines into the American culture mainstream. So that's a very quick introduction to the second module, the food and drink, and I'm now going to hand over to Hannah to talk about sex and sexuality.
Great, thanks Harriet. This is Hannah Davison. I'm the development editor for our Sex and Sexuality project. So just taking control of the slides. Here we go. So we're currently working on the second module. Our first instalment published earlier this year and covered an institutional history of the Kinsey and its place in establishing sexology as a discipline. The second module will focus on self-expression, community and identity, with a wide variety of personal papers and organisational records sourced from multiple archives. This module explores the history of human sexuality from the perspective of the individual and the community from a grassroots level. So one of the personal stories we're including, which I'd like to highlight, is that of Anne Lister, who lived from 1791 to 1840. Anne is a historical lesbian figure who's recently gained fame in popular culture as the protagonist of a successful BBC TV show. Anne was a wealthy English landowner managing her family estate of Shibden Hall, and she kept extensive diaries throughout her life documenting her world travels, estate business, and in code, her various relationships with women. She filled 27 volumes within her lifetime, or around 7,700 pages, or 5 million words. And for reference, this is around 4 times more prolific than the iconic diarist Samuel Pepys. So approximately 1/6 of the diaries are written in a cipher of Lister's own devising, documenting accounts of her relationships with women and most private inner thoughts. Lister suddenly died while travelling in 1840, and the diaries remained at Shibden Hall until the 1890s, when a descendant, John Lister, started publishing extracts from them in local newspapers as a historical document of daily life earlier in the century. Local interest in the diaries led to work on cracking the code, and what they discovered was so alarming in the climate of criminal prosecution of same-sex relationships at the time that the diaries were hidden and kept secret until John's death in 1933. The estate was then opened as a museum and the contents were transferred to a local archive, and various researchers discovered the nature of the coded sections of the diaries, but confirmation of Anne Lister's sexuality was a closely guarded secret until the 1980s, when transcripts started to be published. So despite cover-ups since, it's now believed that her sexuality wasn't completely secret while she lived. She had one of the first de facto lesbian marriages in modern history, celebrating the companionship with her partner Anne Walker in 1834 at a church. The couple then openly lived together in Shibden Hall, and we have such a rich first-hand account of this in her diaries, an indication that at least her close family were aware of the true nature of their relationship. The diaries are clearly an important historical document of the time they were created, preserving the voice of a woman who did not conform to gender or sexuality conventions of the early 19th century, and was only able to do so because of her unique social and financial position. But they can also be used as a lens to explore changing attitudes towards human sexuality in the 2 centuries since they were created, and as a touch point to add context to other historical material we're including in the project. From the 1890s, when the contents of the diaries were so dangerous that they had to be kept secret, we're also publishing contemporary records of criminal prosecution based on sexuality from the UK National Archives. If we then look at the mid-20th century, when the diaries were preserved as a research source, but knowledge of their content was restricted, we can contextualize this with other collections we're publishing that document tentative steps towards the liberation of different sexualities and gender identities, and autobiographical accounts of same-sex relationships that still had to be kept mostly hidden. But then by the time we get to the late 20th century, when extracts from the diaries started to be published, they can then be seen in the context of the emerging gay pride movement, which is documented in the many organisational records and collections of ephemera we're digitising. This brings the diary's relevance right back up to the present day, when Anne Lister's life can be celebrated in a mainstream TV show, and the publication of her full diaries can be seen as part of rewriting the history of sexuality. In fact, in 2011, the diaries were inscribed in the UNESCO UK Memory of the World Register, in recognition of their substantial cultural significance to the UK. This is just one of the many stories we'll be bringing to light in our forthcoming project, many of which are manuscript collections that we'll be making searchable for the first time with HTR. So I hope you will get to know more of them. And I will pass you back to Alex now.
Thanks, Hannah. So we have come to the end of our 4 collections. Just a reminder that all of this is being recorded, so look out for that very soon. But I'll just open up some time for questions. So if anyone has any questions about any of the collections we've just seen, or about Adam Matthew a bit more generally, now is the time to ask. Just a reminder, you can put those questions in the chat window. I'll just type in there. So yeah, do we have any questions at all? Okay, well, if we don't have any questions, I will just point you to the email address on the website. If you think of any, maybe once you've got off this webinar, please feel free to either drop us an email at the address that you can see there, or you can get in contact with us via Twitter. So if you just look up Adam Matthew on Twitter, you'll be able to find us very easily. And please do look out for the recording of this webinar and also the slide deck, which will be in your inboxes in the coming day. So yeah, just thank you from me for attending today's session. We do appreciate your time. Hopefully it's been useful, and yeah, we will be in touch soon. So thank you everyone, and thanks again to our presenters.